My parents were so obsessed with my sister's success that they completely ignored me on my graduation day. While I stood there, waiting for their acknowledgement, they were too busy celebrating her latest achievement to even notice me. I guess every family has its favorite child, but growing up, I never thought I would be the one left standing in the shadows. From the outside, people probably assumed we were just another average family. Two hardworking parents, two kids, a nice house in a quiet neighborhood. But what people didn't see was the way attention always tilted toward my sister, like the entire household was orbiting around her accomplishments while I floated somewhere outside, invisible. My sister, Lily, was what you'd call the golden child. From the moment she was born, it seemed like she had this invisible crown placed on her head. She was the kind of kid who excelled at everything straight A, student, captain of the debate team, fluent in 2 languages by the age of 14. Teachers loved her, neighbors adored her, and my parents, well, they practically worshipped her. I'm not exaggerating when I say they made her achievements their entire identity. Every dinner conversation revolved around Lily's competitions, her grades, her awards. My parents weren't just proud, they were obsessed. If she got a medal, it was displayed in the living room like a sacred relic. If she won a debate, they'd retell the story for weeks, embellishing details as if she'd conquered an empire. Meanwhile, if I brought home something I was proud of, say, a drawing I worked on for hours or a decent grade in a subject, I usually struggled with it, barely got a nod. You'd think that kind of imbalance would stop bothering me after a while, but it doesn't. It builds up quietly, layering resentment on top of hurt, until one day you realize you're not just jealous, you're starved. Starved for recognition, for validation, for even the smallest sign that you matter. And that hunger doesn't go away, even when you grow older. That's why my graduation day was supposed to be different. I told myself, this is my moment. This is the one day they'll have no choice but to look at me. After all, graduations are milestones, right? They're a once-in-a-lifetime event, a day meant to celebrate the hard work of the person crossing that stage. For years I'd been overlooked, but on this day, the spotlight was supposed to be mine. But I should have known better. The weeks leading up to my graduation, my parents were buzzing with excitement, but not for me. No, they were too busy preparing for Lily's big internship reveal. She'd landed a position at a prestigious tech company, and my parents treated it like she'd just been elected president. Every phone call with relatives, every chat with neighbors, they couldn't stop bragging about Lily's bright future. I remember one evening sitting at the dinner table, nervously practicing the short speech I'd written for graduation. I was proud of it. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it was personal, heartfelt. I wanted to share how I'd overcome challenges and learned resilience, how I'd found my own voice even when I felt drowned out. But halfway through, my dad cut me off. He leaned forward, grinning, and said, "Hey, did you hear that Lily's supervisor already hinted at a possible promotion after the internship? Isn't that incredible?" The whole table lit up with chatter about Lily again. My speech? Forgotten in an instant. I just sat there, biting my tongue, staring at the half-eaten food on my plate, wondering why I even tried. By the time the actual graduation day rolled around, I was desperate for things to go differently. I woke up early, carefully put on the gown I'd waited 4 years to wear, and stared at myself in the mirror. "This is your day," I whispered to my reflection. "Don't let them take it from you." When my parents finally came downstairs, I expected hugs, maybe a few words of encouragement. Instead, my mom rushed past me, phone in hand, showing my dad an article about Lily's company. "Look, honey, this place is ranked #1 in innovation this year. Can you imagine what this will mean for Lily's career?" I stood there in silence, the fabric of my gown suddenly feeling heavier, like it was weighing me down instead of lifting me up. At the ceremony, I tried to ignore it all. I told myself that once I walked across that stage, once they heard my name announced and saw me in front of hundreds of people, reality would finally sink in. They'll have to notice me then, I thought. But even as I scanned the crowd from the stage, I could see them in the audience, not watching me. My dad was fiddling with his phone, showing something to my mom, both of them smiling proudly at whatever was on the screen. Later, I found out it was a text from Lily. She'd just been invited to a networking event. Can you imagine that? On the one day that was supposed to belong to me, they were still celebrating her. When I finally walked across the stage and accepted my diploma, I felt nothing. No surge of pride, no relief, no joy, just emptiness. The cheers from the crowd didn't reach me, and the sound of my name felt hollow. After the ceremony, I searched for my parents among the sea of families hugging their graduates. I wanted that moment. The hug, the picture, the "we're so proud of you." But when I found them, they were too busy talking loudly about how Lily's career path was going to open doors no one else in our family ever dreamed of. I stood there, diploma in hand, waiting for acknowledgement that never came. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just about this day. It wasn't about graduation. It was about a lifetime of being overlooked, dismissed, and made to feel like an afterthought. And as much as it hurt, a small part of me realized something important. If I kept waiting for their validation, I'd always be disappointed. I had to find a way to validate myself. But before I reached that conclusion, before I could take that painful but necessary step, there was still the rest of that day. A day that would push me to my breaking point in ways I didn't see coming. Because what happened after the ceremony, well, that was the final straw. After the ceremony ended, I remember standing in the middle of the courtyard with dozens of other graduates, their families swarming around them with hugs, flowers, and cameras flashing non-stop. Everywhere I looked, there were smiling faces, proud parents wiping away tears, siblings carrying bouquets that looked almost as tall as they were. The air buzzed with celebration, a chorus of laughter and joy echoing across the school grounds. And then, there was me. I clutched my diploma against my chest, forcing a smile while scanning the crowd for my parents. My stomach tightened as I spotted them off to the side, not holding flowers or balloons for me but instead animatedly talking to one of our family friends. I walked closer, hoping maybe, just maybe, they'd finally turn and wrap me in their arms. Instead, I caught the tail end of their conversation. "She's at the top of her class, you know," my mom was saying, her face glowing. "Her professors are already hinting at long-term opportunities. That company is so lucky to have her." The friend nodded eagerly. "Lily always was destined for greatness. You must be so proud." "Oh, we are," my dad chimed in. "She's going to put our family name on the map." I froze. For a second, I thought maybe they had switched daughters on me in some strange twist. But no, they weren't talking about me. They were bragging about Lily. On my graduation day, while I stood 3 feet away holding the proof of 4 years of my own hard work. When my mom finally noticed me, her smile faltered for half a second before she said, "Oh, honey, there you are? You looked nice up there." She patted my shoulder like I'd just finished a routine chore instead of one of the biggest milestones of my life. "Thanks," I said, my throat tight. "Can we take a picture?" "Of course," she replied, but it wasn't enthusiastic. My dad had already turned back to his phone. We posed quickly. Just one photo, me standing stiffly between them, their smiles polite but distracted. No flowers, no balloons, no, "we're proud of you." Just a forced moment captured on a stranger's camera. Then they slipped right back into talking about Lily. I wish I could say I stormed off right then, but the truth is, I stayed. I stayed because a part of me still craved that recognition, that warmth. Maybe at the family lunch they'd planned, things would be different. Maybe then they'd say the words I'd been longing to hear. We drove to the restaurant, a cozy Italian place I'd picked weeks before. I imagined us sitting together, my parents raising their glasses to toast my future, maybe even laughing about some memory from my school years. But the reality was far from what I pictured. The moment we sat down, my mom launched into a detailed story about Lily's upcoming networking event. She described the guest list, the industry leaders who'd be there, the opportunities it could open. My dad leaned in, hanging on every word, as if they were planning a royal coronation. I sat silently, twirling my fork in the breadbasket, waiting for a pause in the conversation. I rehearsed my line in my head. This day means a lot to me too. Can we talk about it? But every time I tried to speak, someone cut me off. At one point, I cleared my throat and said, Oh, that reminds me, my dad interrupted, turning back to my mom. Did Lily mention if she needs new business attire? We should take her shopping this weekend. She'll need to look professional. My words dissolved before they ever left my mouth. I think the waiter noticed. He glanced at me when he poured water into my glass, his eyes soft, almost pitying. But pity wasn't what I wanted. I wanted my parents to see me not as the backup child, not as the footnote in Lily's story, but as myself. The food arrived, steaming plates of pasta and garlic bread. I pushed the noodles around with my fork, while my parents continued their monologue about Lily's greatness. At some point, my mom turned to me and asked, "So, what are your plans now?" I perked up, ready to finally share something about myself. "That's nice," she said, cutting me off before I could finish. "But don't you think it would be smart to ask Lily for advice first? She's already got so much experience in this area." I felt the sting like a slap. I hadn't even told them my idea yet, and already they were dismissing me, redirecting the focus back to her. I sat there, heat rising in my cheeks, a storm of words caught in my chest. I wanted to scream, to slam my hands on the table, to demand, "When is it my turn? When will you ever look at me and actually see me?" But I didn't. I just chewed slowly, forcing down both the food and my feelings. After lunch, they insisted on calling Lily. "We should congratulate her again," my dad said, as if she were the one who had just graduated. They dialed her number on speakerphone, and soon her cheerful voice filled the car. "Hi, sweetheart," my mom gushed. "We were just telling everyone about your internship. They're so impressed." I sat in the back seat, staring out the window, my diploma resting on my lap like a forgotten prop. My hands curled into fists, nails digging into my palms. And that's when the dam inside me began to crack. Because it wasn't just neglect anymore, it was erasure. On the day meant to celebrate me, they had turned everything into a celebration of Lily. It wasn't carelessness. It wasn't a simple mistake. It was a pattern, a deliberate blindness to my existence. When we got home, I went straight to my room. I closed the door quietly, sat on the edge of my bed, and let the tears fall. Not loud sobs, just silent, steady streams down my face. I didn't want them to hear. I didn't want their pity. But I did want answers. Later that night, I gathered enough courage to go downstairs. My parents were in the living room, still talking about Lily's internship. I stood there for a moment, watching them laugh and smile like their entire world revolved around her. And then, for the first time in my life, I interrupted. "Can I ask you something?" I said, my voice trembling but loud enough to cut through their conversation. They turned to look at me, surprised. "Why is it," I asked, "that no matter what I do, it's never enough for you? Why is it that even on my graduation day, all you could talk about was Lily?" The room went silent. My mom blinked, as if I'd spoken a foreign language. My dad frowned, his jaw tightening. "What do you mean?" my mom asked carefully. "I mean," I said, my voice breaking, "I worked for 4 years for this day. I studied, I pushed myself, I made it to graduation, and all I wanted just once was for you to be proud of me. But you weren't. You barely looked at me. You made everything about her, like you always do." Their faces hardened, a mix of confusion and defensiveness. "That's not true," my dad said firmly. "We're proud of both of you." "Really?" I asked, my voice rising. "Because it doesn't feel like it. It feels like I don't even exist when she's around. You brag about her to everyone. You celebrate her every step. But me? You don't even listen when I talk." My mom opened her mouth, then closed it again. For once, she didn't have a quick defense. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. And then, my dad muttered something that shattered me completely. "Well, she makes it easy. She's always been exceptional." There it was. The truth I had suspected all along, spoken out loud. My worth measured against hers, and found lacking. I felt the ground shift beneath me. My chest tightened, my vision blurred. I couldn't breathe in that room anymore, so I turned and walked away. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, something inside me shifted. The pain was raw, but beneath it, a seed of resolve began to form. If they weren't going to see me, then I would find a way to make myself seen. Not for them, but for me. Because I realized something important. Being invisible to them didn't mean I had to be invisible to the world. And that was the beginning of a decision that would change everything. The days that followed my confrontation were strange, both suffocating and liberating at the same time. After that emotional outburst, I thought things might shift. I thought maybe my parents would see the cracks in their behavior, maybe they would finally start to understand. But, as usual, they continued to act like nothing had changed. The morning after the argument, I woke up with a gnawing emptiness in my chest. The reality of what I had said the night before began to sink in. I had laid bare the hurt I had been carrying for years. But despite my honesty, there was still no acknowledgement, no apology, no change in their behavior. It was like speaking my truth had done nothing more than echo into an abyss. That morning, my mom breezed through the house like everything was fine. She asked if I wanted breakfast, as if we hadn't just had the most heated conversation in years. "How about some pancakes?" she said, her voice light and cheerful. "I'm making your favorite." I looked at her, unsure whether I should say anything else or just let it go. Maybe the silence would be more powerful than continuing to push them to see me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, "I'm not hungry." For a moment, I saw a flash of concern in her eyes, but it was gone just as quickly as it appeared. She nodded and moved on. I could feel the distance between us growing, but I had no idea how to bridge it. I had poured my heart out, but I had been met with indifference, and it hurt more than I expected. In a way, I think I had hoped that one outburst would be the key to unlocking everything, but it only left me feeling more alone. That was when I realized, if I didn't take control of my own narrative, no one else would. If I didn't learn to live for myself, then I would continue to shrink in the shadows of my sister's success. So, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. I was going to stop waiting for them to notice me. I was going to stop relying on their approval. It was time to carve out my own identity and find my own path. I didn't have it all figured out, who does? But I knew that I couldn't keep waiting for them to validate me. And honestly, a part of me was tired of always feeling like I was competing with Lily. No matter how hard I tried, it felt like I would never measure up to her perfect image. So, I decided to start measuring myself on my own terms. I started small. I joined a local community project that aimed to help underprivileged kids with their education. It wasn't glamorous or groundbreaking, but it gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. For once, I was doing something for myself, something that didn't require my parents' attention or praise. The first day I volunteered, I felt like I was finally making a difference. I tutored a group of eager kids who were hungry for knowledge, and their smiles, their excitement, made me feel like I mattered. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was doing a good job, because I could see the impact I was having. I would leave those sessions feeling exhausted but content. For the first time, I felt like I was contributing to something bigger than myself, and it didn't matter if anyone noticed. I was finally finding value in my actions rather than relying on others to acknowledge me. But even as I embraced this new sense of independence, the tension with my parents continued to simmer beneath the surface. Every time I returned home from a community meeting, my dad would ask, "So, how's your little side project going?" His tone was always dismissive, like what I was doing didn't really matter. Meanwhile, my mom would talk nonstop about Lily's next steps. "She's already planning her first big project for the company," my mom would gush. "It's impressive how quickly she's moving up." And that's when it really hit me. This was their world. My sister was the centerpiece, the star, and I was the background noise. I could shout and scream and beg for their attention, but they would never hear me. So, I did something radical. I stopped trying to compete. I stopped trying to make them see me in the way I wanted to be seen. Instead, I started focusing on myself, on building a future that didn't depend on their approval. I enrolled in a couple of online courses to develop my skills further. I learned coding, something I had always been curious about but never thought I was smart enough to do. For the first time in years, I was genuinely excited about something I was doing. The classes weren't easy. There were times when I wanted to quit, when I felt like I wasn't making any progress. But I pushed through. It was the first time I had done something purely for my own growth. It wasn't about pleasing my parents or proving anything to them. It was about me. As I dove deeper into my courses and my volunteer work, I began to realize that I was capable of so much more than I had ever given myself credit for. I didn't need their validation. I was already building a life I could be proud of. And then, something surprising happened. Lily called me one afternoon. It had been a while since we'd talked, and honestly, I didn't expect much from her. But she caught me off guard when she said, "Hey, I've been thinking about you a lot lately." I froze. This was not the usual Lily. I knew the one who was always wrapped up in her own world, who rarely checked in on me. "I've noticed you've been doing some really cool stuff lately," she said, her voice softer than I expected. "And well, I'm proud of you." For a second, I couldn't speak. "What?" I said, my voice cracking. "You're proud of me?" "Excellent. Yeah," she replied, her voice sincere. "I think it's amazing how you've been focusing on what makes you happy. I've been kind of caught up in my own world, and I guess I didn't see how hard you were working until now. I'm sorry for that." I felt a rush of emotions, surprise, relief, and a bit of sadness too. For so long, I had felt invisible. And hearing her words was like a validation I never expected to get from her. But I knew, deep down, that I had to stop relying on others for approval, even from Lily. We talked for a while longer, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was having an honest conversation with my sister. But I also realized that our relationship didn't need to revolve around comparison. I didn't have to be like her, or do things her way to be successful or valued. That was the moment when I truly started to embrace the idea that my worth wasn't tied to my family's expectations. I was learning to trust myself, and for once, I was beginning to understand that my value wasn't dependent on being seen by anyone other than myself. But even though things were shifting, the road ahead was still far from easy. There would be moments of doubt, times when the pull of my parents' approval would feel almost unbearable. But now, I was learning to see myself in a new light, no longer as the second choice, no longer as the invisible one. In the weeks that followed, I continued working on my online courses, volunteering, and slowly, I started taking on freelance projects. Little by little, I was building a life that was truly mine, independent of their shadows. And while my parents didn't fully understand it at first, I knew that one day, they would have no choice but to see the person I was becoming. Because the truth was, I wasn't just trying to prove myself to them anymore, I was proving it to me. By the time autumn rolled around, I could feel the subtle shifts in my life. It wasn't dramatic. Not like a sudden windstorm that turns everything upside down. It was quieter, more insistent, like the slow growth of roots beneath the soil, unseen but steadily strengthening. Each day, I noticed small victories that no one else seemed to care about, but that mattered to me profoundly. I remember one morning, sitting at my desk with a cup of coffee, going over the freelance coding project I had taken on. The client was impressed with my work, complimenting not just the technical skills but also my initiative, my problem solving, my creativity. For the first time in years, I felt recognized, not by my parents, not by Lily, but by someone who actually saw my work for what it was. It was validating in a way that was entirely my own. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my parents continued to marvel at Lily's successes, I was quietly building a life that was fulfilling in ways they had never imagined. They remained unaware of the long hours I spent learning new skills, of the late nights I poured into volunteering, of the projects I handled entirely on my own. And strangely, that was liberating. I started to understand that my sense of self-worth didn't need to be contingent on their attention. It didn't need to revolve around comparisons or approvals. I was discovering a truth that had eluded me for so long, that my life could have meaning, excitement, and accomplishment without being measured against anyone else. With that newfound clarity, I began making bold decisions. I applied for scholarships, networking events, and mentorship programs that aligned with my interests. Each application felt like a declaration. I wasn't just existing in the periphery of my family's world anymore. I was actively shaping my own. One particularly pivotal moment came when I was accepted into a competitive summer program focused on entrepreneurship and technology. The program wasn't just an opportunity to learn, it was a chance to surround myself with people who shared my drive, my curiosity, and my vision. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere completely on my own terms. But life outside my family's sphere wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when their constant favoritism so deeply ingrained still stung. Every phone call from my parents, every casual mention of Lily's latest achievement, was a reminder of how long I had been overlooked. I had to constantly remind myself that my validation came from within, that their opinions were no longer the measure of my worth. The turning point came one evening during a family dinner that I had reluctantly attended. I had been invited, but this time, I went with a sense of detachment, almost curiosity, to see if I could observe my family without feeling diminished. As usual, my parents began talking about Lily's latest accolades, her rapid career advancement, her recent recognition in industry publications, the next big steps she planned to take. I sat quietly, listening but not reacting. Normally, I would have felt an intense mix of frustration and invisibility, but this time, something had shifted. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't disappearing. I was just present, on my own terms. Finally, my mom turned to me. "So, what have you been up to?" she asked, her tone slightly hesitant, almost wary. I smiled, a genuine smile that reflected the confidence I had been building over the past few months. "Actually, I've been working on several projects. I joined a tech program this summer, and I'm taking on some freelance work that's really challenging and exciting. I've even been mentoring a few students through my volunteer program." For a moment, the room went quiet. My parents exchanged glances, their faces a mixture of surprise, uncertainty, and, I think, a touch of guilt. "That's impressive," my dad finally said, his voice guarded. "Yes," my mom added, nodding slowly. "It sounds like you've really been busy." I could see it in their eyes. They hadn't anticipated this. They had assumed that I would continue to fade into the background, but I was no longer invisible. Emboldened by their reaction, I continued. "I've realized something important over the past few months. I can't rely on anyone else to validate my achievements. I have to create my own path, and I have to celebrate myself. And that's exactly what I'm doing." My words hung in the air, resonant and firm. For the first time, I felt that my parents weren't in control of my narrative. I wasn't competing for their approval. I was simply living, fully and unapologetically, on my own terms. It was in that moment I realized that independence wasn't just about financial or professional freedom. It was about emotional autonomy, the ability to define your worth without the constant weighing and measuring by others, even the ones who should love you unconditionally. Over the next few weeks, I started making tangible changes in my life. I rearranged my schedule to focus more on my projects and less on monitoring my family's constant updates about Lily. I reached out to mentors and peers, seeking guidance and collaboration rather than validation. I even started documenting my progress, not for anyone else, but for myself, proof that my hard work mattered. And then came another critical milestone, a personal project I had been working on for months. A small app designed to help students track their learning progress and set personal goals was finally ready to launch. I had poured countless hours into coding, testing, and refining it. It was far from perfect, but it was mine, a product of my dedication and vision. When I shared it with friends and colleagues outside my family, the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. People were genuinely impressed by what I had built, asking how I managed to create such a useful tool from scratch. Their enthusiasm was energizing, a stark contrast to the indifference I had grown accustomed to at home. I realized then that success didn't need to be validated by my parents or measured against Lily's achievements. Success could be defined by impact, effort, and fulfillment. For the first time, I was beginning to see that the life I wanted didn't have to compete with anyone else's, it simply had to be mine. And yet, despite all these victories, there remained a lingering tension, a question that refused to go away. Could my parents ever truly see me? Could they ever appreciate me for who I was, rather than constantly comparing me to Lily? It was a question I didn't have an answer to yet, and I knew it might not be an easy one to resolve. But for the first time in years, I felt empowered enough to face it head-on, to navigate my own path even if their acknowledgement never came. In the weeks that followed, I began to embrace a new philosophy. I didn't need permission to shine. I didn't need approval to pursue my passions. And I certainly didn't need to compete in the shadow of my sister to feel worthy. I was building a life that was mine, crafted from my own decisions, my own courage, and my own resilience. And in doing so, I discovered something that no amount of parental favoritism could take away. The undeniable truth that I mattered, not because anyone else said so, but because I chose to see it myself. That realization didn't erase the pain of years spent in the shadows, nor did it immediately heal the wounds of neglect, but it planted the seed of something far more important, the belief that I could define my own destiny, and that my worth was not contingent on anyone else's perception. And in that belief, I found freedom. The weeks following that family dinner felt like a turning point in my life. Something had changed, not just in my actions, but in how I viewed myself. I had crossed a threshold, one that meant I no longer needed anyone's permission to succeed. But even as I stepped boldly into my new life, a part of me couldn't shake the emotional weight of what had happened before. I had learned to live for myself, to build a life independent of my family's constant comparisons and expectations. But I still carried the pain, the residual feeling of being invisible, of being overlooked for years in favor of someone else. Despite all my progress, that hurt lingered like a shadow in the back of my mind. I tried to push it away, to keep moving forward. I was busy with work, my new freelance projects, and my community involvement. Yet, even on the busiest days, that shadow crept back in. I would catch myself thinking about my parents, wondering if they ever thought about me the way they thought about Lily, wondering if they regretted how they had treated me. There was no escaping the fact that, for much of my life, I had been made to feel like a second choice. Lily's successes had been celebrated to the point where my own accomplishments were nothing but a quiet whisper in the background. I had spent years trying to make myself seen by them, to gain their approval, to prove I was worthy of their love. And yet, time and time again, I was ignored. And that's when I realized something crucial. I had spent so much of my life trying to win their affection that I had neglected to ask myself the most important question of all. What do I need to heal? It wasn't enough to keep moving forward and pretending everything was fine. I had to confront the deep wounds, the scars that had formed from years of neglect. I had to acknowledge the parts of me that were still hurting, and for the first time, I had to allow myself to feel that pain. It wasn't easy. For so long, I had pushed my emotions down, burying them under the guise of independence and self-sufficiency. I had convinced myself that as long as I was successful on my own, the past didn't matter. But it did matter. It mattered deeply. The first step in healing was admitting that the pain was real. It wasn't just a passing feeling or a minor inconvenience. It was a part of me that had been left unaddressed for years. I had been neglected, and that neglect had shaped my sense of self-worth. I had to sit with that discomfort and allow myself the space to grieve, not for what I didn't have, but for what I had lost along the way. I started by seeking therapy. For the first time, I admitted that I needed help to work through my emotions. The idea of sitting with someone and talking about my parents, about Lily, about everything that had gone wrong, was intimidating. But I knew it was necessary. My therapist, Emily, was warm and understanding. She helped me process the deep feelings of resentment and abandonment that I had kept hidden for so long. It was a slow, often painful process, but every session allowed me to peel back layers of emotion I had long suppressed. One session, in particular, stands out in my mind. We were discussing my relationship with my parents, and I found myself crying not because of anything that had happened recently, but because of the years of quiet, unspoken hurt. The realization hit me hard. I had spent so much of my life trying to earn their love, and I had never stopped to ask myself if I deserved to be loved unconditionally, regardless of what I achieved. As the tears came, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't crying just for the things I hadn't received. I was crying for the love I hadn't given myself. I had spent so many years chasing after their approval that I had forgotten to show myself the same kindness and compassion. That day, I made a promise to myself. I would stop waiting for their validation. I would stop seeking their approval. I would learn to validate myself, to acknowledge my own worth without relying on anyone else to see it. It was time to break free from the need for external affirmation and, instead, become my own source of love and acceptance. As I worked through these emotions, something remarkable happened. My relationship with my parents started to shift, but not in the way I expected. I realized that the more I healed, the more I began to set boundaries. I no longer accepted their dismissive attitudes or their comparisons to Lily. I didn't need to confront them directly every time they made me feel overlooked. Instead, I chose not to engage in conversations that made me feel small. It wasn't an easy transition. My parents weren't used to this new version of me. They didn't know how to respond when I stopped seeking their approval. At first, they pushed back, assuming I was just being rebellious or distant. But over time, they began to see that my silence wasn't about rejection, it was about self-preservation. I think they began to realize, albeit slowly, that I wasn't asking for their approval anymore. I was no longer competing with Lily, no longer trying to be seen through their eyes. I had taken control of my own narrative, and I was no longer waiting for them to validate my existence. One evening, about a month after I had started therapy, my dad called me. It was a surprise, as he rarely reached out unless it was about something concerning Lily. "How are you doing?" he asked, his voice tentative. "I'm doing well," I said, my voice steady. "I've been keeping busy with work, taking on new projects, and focusing on my personal growth." There was a long pause. "We've noticed," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I think we both may have overlooked a lot of the things you've been doing. I'm sorry for that." The apology, though unexpected, didn't immediately heal the wounds, but it was a start. It was a recognition, however small, that maybe I wasn't just the background character in their lives anymore. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied, "but I've realized something important. I can't wait for you to validate me anymore." I've learned to validate myself, and I'm learning to love who I am, regardless of whether or not you see it. There was another long pause, and then my dad said something that surprised me even more. I think I understand, he said quietly. Maybe I've been caught up in my own world too. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I'm proud of what you've done. I didn't know what to say. My heart was still healing, still learning to accept that my parents' love wasn't conditional. But hearing those words from him meant more than I had expected. I appreciate that, I said softly. But I also need to say that I'm proud of me too. And that's what matters most now. He gets tired off. It wasn't a perfect resolution. I didn't expect everything to change overnight. But it was a moment of healing, of progress. I continued my journey toward independence, not just in terms of my career or accomplishments, but emotionally as well. I started to embrace the fact that I didn't need my parents' approval to be worthy. My worth was inherent, and that was something I was learning to embrace fully. But I also understood something else. Healing didn't mean cutting ties or severing connections. It meant recognizing the hurt, acknowledging the neglect, and setting boundaries while still allowing space for growth. I wasn't waiting for a perfect relationship with my parents, but I was learning to find peace within myself, regardless of whether they were on the same journey. And as I grew into the person I was meant to be, confident, independent, and free from the shadows of comparison, I realized that the most important love I could give was the love I gave myself. The sun was setting one evening as I sat by my desk, looking out at the sprawling city below. The skyline had become a symbol of the future I was carving out for myself. A future that, for once, didn't rely on anyone else's expectations or validation. I had spent so long living in the shadows of my family's favoritism, constantly trying to prove my worth. But that time was over. I had taken control of my own narrative. It wasn't an easy path, and there were days when doubt still crept in, whispering that I wasn't good enough, or that I hadn't really succeeded. But each day, I made the conscious choice to push those thoughts aside and reaffirm my own worth. I had come so far from the person I was in the beginning, when I was invisible to my parents, always trying to catch their attention. I no longer needed to prove myself to them or anyone else. I had found my strength, my purpose, and it was all mine. But even with all the progress I had made, there was still one final obstacle I had to face. The wound that had been there for so long, the neglect, the comparisons to Lily, the emotional abandonment still lingered. It wasn't that I hadn't healed, but there was a part of me that still wanted something from my parents. Recognition, an acknowledgement of my worth that had never come. That desire for validation hadn't completely disappeared. It was human to want the people who brought you into this world to see you for who you truly were, to love you for your own accomplishments and not just as an extension of someone else. But I knew, deep down, that I couldn't keep chasing that elusive approval. I had to let it go, and embrace the fact that I might never get the closure I wanted from them. That's when I decided I needed to confront them one last time, not in anger, not with accusations, but with a calm, honest conversation. I had spent too long waiting for them to change, or to finally see me. It was time to tell them how I felt, not as a child desperate for their love, but as an adult who had taken ownership of her own life. It was a Wednesday evening when I called my mom to ask if we could talk. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I knew it was the right thing to do. She agreed, and we set a time to meet at a local cafe, somewhere neutral, where emotions could be discussed without the pressure of being in our family home. When I arrived, my mom was already there, sitting at a corner table. She looked up as I approached, her face softening when she saw me. For a moment, I was reminded of the woman who had once held me close, who had kissed my forehead when I was a child, and promised she would always be there. But that woman had been overshadowed by the one who had given so much of herself to Lily, leaving me to fend for myself. "Hey, sweetheart," she said with a tentative smile. "How are you?" It was not managed to go. "I'm doing well, actually," I replied, taking a seat across from her. "There's just something I've been meaning to talk to you about." My mom's expression changed slightly, and I could see the hint of concern in her eyes. "Of course, what is it?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. I had rehearsed what I was going to say in my head 100 times, but now that the words were about to leave my mouth, they seemed more fragile than I had imagined. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about our family, about how things have always been," I began slowly, "and I think it's time I tell you how I've been feeling for a long time." My mom remained quiet, listening intently. I continued. "For years, I felt like I was invisible to you and Dad. I felt like no matter what I did, I was always in Lily's shadow. Every accomplishment I had seemed to pale in comparison to hers, and I never felt like I was enough." I watched her face as I spoke, looking for signs of recognition, but there was only silence. "Still," I pressed on, "I've spent so much of my life trying to make you proud, trying to gain your approval, but I've realized that I've been seeking something from you that I may never get. I've been trying to prove my worth to you when, in reality, my worth doesn't come from you. It comes from within me. And it always has. Any one so paysan in percentage and many, said way so person of the Tixtaff." The words hung in the air, both heavy and liberating. My mom didn't say anything for a long time. Her hands were folded in front of her, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "I didn't know you felt that way," she said quietly, her voice tinged with regret. "I guess I got so caught up in everything with Lily, in wanting the best for her, that I didn't realize how much you were hurting. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Her apology was a small but significant step. It wasn't enough to erase the years of neglect, but it was the first time she had acknowledged the pain I had been carrying. It was the first time she had recognized that I wasn't just a background character in our family's story. "I know you're proud of Lily," I said gently, "and I know you want the best for her, but I need you to understand that I am not a lesser person because I don't fit into the mold you've created for success. I'm proud of who I am, of what I've accomplished, and of the person I've become. And I need you to see that, not because of what I do, but because of who I am." My mom's eyes glistened with tears. "I see you now," she whispered. "I'm sorry for not seeing you before. I never meant to hurt you." And in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't a magical fix, and I knew there was still work to be done, but I could feel the weight of years of silent hurt start to lift. For the first time, my mom saw me not as her second child, not as the one who paled in comparison to Lily, but as me. We sat in silence for a while, letting the conversation sink in. It was as if a veil had been lifted from our relationship. The layers of expectation, comparison, and neglect had started to unravel. It wouldn't happen overnight, and there would still be moments of tension and misunderstanding, but it felt like a new chapter had begun. Before we left, my mom hugged me. It wasn't the tight embrace I had craved for years, but it was a start, a small but meaningful gesture that signaled that things could change. As I walked away from the cafe that evening, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had taken the steps to confront my past, to face the truth of how I had been treated, and to demand the respect I deserved not from my parents, but from myself. I realized that this conversation was just the beginning. I didn't need my parents' approval to feel whole, to feel validated. But I also understood that healing didn't always mean cutting people out or severing relationships. Sometimes, healing meant having difficult conversations, setting boundaries, and learning to move forward together in a healthier way. In the weeks that followed, I focused on continuing my work, my personal growth, and my relationships with the people who truly supported me. I kept nurturing my freelance projects, furthering my education, and building a network of like-minded individuals who believed in my abilities, not because of my family connections, but because of who I was. And while I knew that my relationship with my parents would never be perfect, I also understood that it didn't need to be. I had learned that the most important relationship was the one I had with myself. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer defined by my family's expectations. I had stepped into my own light, and no one could take that from me. The months following my conversation with my mom were some of the most transformative of my life. It wasn't that everything changed overnight, it wasn't some kind of instant magical fix. No, it was a quieter transformation, the kind that happens slowly, almost imperceptibly. But as I looked back, I realized that the person I was becoming was no longer tethered to my past, no longer defined by the need to prove myself to anyone. I had become the architect of my own life, building it piece by piece with a sense of purpose I had never known before. I still had my struggles. Of course, no one's life is ever completely free of challenges, but for the first time, I felt like I was truly in control. I was working on my freelance projects, but they had started to grow in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had built a small but loyal client base, and I was even starting to receive offers from companies who were impressed by my work. It wasn't the kind of success I had once imagined. There were no grand announcements or public accolades, but it was my success. It was grounded in something real, something that I had created for myself. But it wasn't just my professional life that had transformed. My personal life was evolving too. I had started to make time for the things I loved, things that had been pushed aside for so long. I rediscovered my passion for painting, something I hadn't done in years. I joined a book club with a few people I had met through my community work, and it quickly became one of the highlights of my week. I found myself not only creating but also connecting, in ways that were meaningful and fulfilling. But even as my life began to flourish, the dynamic with my family remained a source of tension. There were moments when my parents tried to engage with me more, especially after our conversation. My mom would occasionally call to check in, and my dad, although still somewhat distant, had started offering more genuine praise when we talked about my work. But despite these small gestures, the underlying current of neglect and favoritism toward Lily remained. I had to remind myself that this was okay, that I didn't need their validation, and that the most important thing was that I was proud of myself. The truth was, I was still healing from the years of emotional neglect. I still carried some of the scars, but they didn't define me anymore. One evening, as I sat in my apartment after finishing a big project for a new client, I received a message from Lily. We hadn't talked much since that day we'd had our conversation about her. I knew she had been busy with her own life, and I had distanced myself a bit, partly out of self-protection, partly because I wanted to redefine my relationship with her. But now, as I saw her name on my phone screen, I felt a curiosity bubbling up. I opened the message. "Hey, can we talk? I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I miss you." I paused, reading the words over and over. Lily and I hadn't shared much more than a few casual texts since that moment where we both acknowledged our separate paths. She had always been the star of our family, the one who didn't need to try because everything seemed to fall into place for her. I, on the other hand, had spent my life fighting for attention, fighting for recognition, fighting for love. But something about her message felt different. There was no boastfulness in it, no undercurrent of competition. There was just a simple desire to reconnect, to bridge the gap that had grown between us. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. Part of me still felt the weight of the years of comparison and neglect. But the other part of me, the part that had learned to heal, to grow, to love herself, understood that the only way to truly move forward was to embrace the present. I typed a response. "I'd like that. Let's talk." We agreed to meet the next day. When I walked into the cafe where we had arranged to meet, I was nervous. But it wasn't the same kind of nervousness I had felt in the past. This wasn't a nervousness that came from trying to impress her or prove myself. This was just the normal, human nervousness that comes with reconnecting after a long time. Lily was already there, sitting at a corner table. She smiled when she saw me, her eyes softer than I remembered. There was no sense of superiority, no, "I'm better than you," aura. just a sister who genuinely wanted to spend time with me. "Hey," she said, standing up and hugging me. It was brief but warm, and it felt like the first real hug we'd shared in years. "Hey," I replied, settling into the chair across from her. We ordered coffee, and for the first few minutes, there was an awkward silence. I wasn't sure where to start, where to go from here. Finally, Lily spoke. "I know we haven't really talked much lately, and I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." I looked at her surprised. "Sorry? For what?" "For everything," she said quietly. "I know I've been kind of wrapped up in my own world. I didn't realize how much you were hurting, how much I was hurting you by just existing in my own bubble. I was so focused on my own success that I didn't even see how it was affecting you. I should have been there for you more." I swallowed the lump in my throat, feeling a mix of emotions. This was the acknowledgement I had always wanted from her, the apology I had never expected to hear. But instead of feeling vindicated, I felt something else, a sense of peace. "I appreciate you saying that," I said, my voice steady. "But I think we both have our own journeys. I've had to learn to take care of myself, to build my own life without needing anyone's approval. I've learned that I don't need to be seen through your success, or anyone else's for that matter." Lily nodded, her eyes sincere. "I get that now. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. You've always been enough, just the way you are." Her words felt like a balm to a wound I had carried for so long. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was competing with her anymore. She wasn't the star, and I wasn't the shadow. We were just two people, two sisters, figuring it out. "I think we both have our own paths," I said, smiling. "And that's okay. We don't need to be the same. I don't need to live in your shadow, and you don't need to live in mine. And this." She smiled back, and it felt like the weight of years of unspoken tension had finally lifted. We talked for hours that afternoon, catching up on everything that had happened in our lives. It wasn't about comparing ourselves or seeking validation. It was about simply being there for each other, acknowledging our individual journeys, and respecting the space we each needed to grow. After that day, our relationship was never the same, but it didn't need to be. It wasn't about returning to the way things were before, it was about forging something new, something healthier, something built on mutual respect and understanding. And as I drove home that evening, I realized that I was finally free. Free from the chains of comparison, free from the need to prove myself, and free from the emotional weight I had carried for so long. I didn't need my family's approval anymore. I didn't need to be seen by anyone other than myself. I had built a life that was uniquely mine, and I was proud of it. The road ahead was still long, and there would always be moments when the past threatened to resurface. But now, I had the strength to face whatever came next, knowing that I was enough. For the first time in my life, I truly believed that. The weeks that followed my conversation with Lily felt like stepping into a new world. It wasn't that everything around me had changed. The city looked the same. My apartment was still filled with the familiar clutter of books, notebooks, and half-finished projects. But I had changed. I could feel it in the way I walked, the way I interacted with people, the way I approached challenges. I was no longer carrying the weight of years of neglect or the invisible comparison to Lily. Instead, I carried a sense of purpose, a quiet confidence that came from finally standing in my own light. I started taking on bigger freelance projects, ones that pushed me out of my comfort zone. I was invited to collaborate with a startup that was developing educational software for underserved communities. The work was challenging, demanding long hours and creative problem solving, but it thrilled me. I felt alive in a way I hadn't before, and for the first time, I was doing something purely for myself, something that wasn't about seeking approval or recognition. Even as I immersed myself in work, I made time for personal development. I enrolled in workshops on leadership and communication, something I had always admired in other people but never thought I could embody. Each session was a revelation, showing me that confidence, presence, and influence weren't just things you were born with, they were skills you could learn. And slowly, I was becoming the person I had always wanted to be. Competent, self-assured, and unafraid to take space in the world. One afternoon, I sat at my desk reviewing a proposal for a new project when my phone buzzed. It was my mom. Normally, a call from her about Lily would have made me tense, ready to retreat. But now, it felt different. I answered. "Hey," she said cautiously. "I wanted to check in and see how things are going." I smiled. "I'm doing well, busy, but good. Lots of new projects." Ender sad. "It's tack too." There was a pause, and then she said, "I know I haven't always been the parent I should have been. I see that now. I'm proud of you. Not because of what you do, but because of who you are." Her words, though small, carried weight. They weren't perfect. And I knew our relationship was still complicated, but it was progress. For the first time, I felt like my parents were acknowledging me, not as a footnote to Lily, but as my own person. I hung up and leaned back in my chair, letting the moment sink in. I realized something profound. Recognition from others is valuable, yes, but it's nothing compared to the recognition you give yourself. All the years I had spent seeking validation could never have compared to the quiet strength I now felt in knowing my own worth. The next day, I decided to take a bold step. I pitched a concept for an educational platform I had been developing for months to a group of investors. It was ambitious, and I knew it might fail, but it didn't matter. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of failing in front of my family or anyone else. I was doing this for me. The pitch went better than I expected. The investors were impressed not just by the concept but by my clarity, my vision, and my confidence. They asked questions, challenged assumptions, and I answered without hesitation. When the meeting ended, one of them shook my hand and said, "You have a real vision here. We'd like to support you." I walked out of that room with my chest swelling, not because someone else had validated me, but because I had shown myself what I was capable of. It was a moment of pure self-affirmation, and it reinforced everything I had been learning. That my worth wasn't tied to my parents' recognition or Lily's achievements, it came from within. That evening, I reflected on my journey. I thought back to my graduation day, to the pain of being ignored, to the years of striving for attention that never came. I thought about the long nights of self-doubt, the frustration, the tears, and I realized that every step of that journey had led me here, to a place of strength and autonomy. I had learned to set boundaries with my parents without cutting them out completely. I had repaired my relationship with Lily, not by competing with her, but by embracing our differences and respecting each other's paths. And most importantly, I had learned to see myself as enough, not as someone who needed to prove her worth, but as someone who already possessed it. In the weeks that followed, I began to explore opportunities that I had previously thought were out of reach. I started attending industry conferences, networking with professionals who inspired me, and even mentoring others who were just beginning their journeys. Each interaction reinforced the truth I had been discovering, that I had something unique to offer the world, and that I didn't need to hide in the shadows of anyone else's accomplishments. One day, while walking home from a conference, I paused in front of a reflective glass building and looked at my reflection. I saw someone strong, capable, and confident. Someone who had endured years of neglect and comparison, yet had emerged resilient and self-assured. I smiled, feeling a profound sense of pride, not the fleeting pride that comes from external praise, but a deep, enduring pride in knowing that I had taken control of my own life. And as I continued to walk, I realized that the past no longer held power over me. My parents' favoritism, the years of being overlooked, the sense of invisibility, they were still part of my story, but they no longer defined me. I had rewritten the narrative. I had chosen my own path, and I was walking it boldly, unapologetically, and fully aware of my own worth. It wasn't just about career success or personal achievement. It was about living authentically, embracing my passions, and building relationships that were based on mutual respect and understanding. It was about finally finding peace within myself and recognizing that I was complete as I was. In that moment, I understood that independence isn't just about financial stability or professional success, it's about emotional freedom. It's about letting go of the need for external approval, embracing your own worth, and creating a life that reflects your true self. And for the first time, I felt a sense of serenity, a calm confidence that I had never known before. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I was no longer the overlooked child, the shadow, the second choice. I was me, fully and unapologetically, and that was enough. As the days turned into weeks, I continued to grow, taking on new challenges, embracing new experiences, and nurturing the relationships that mattered. I stayed connected with Lily, building a relationship rooted in understanding and respect rather than competition. I maintained a healthier dynamic with my parents, acknowledging their presence without allowing their past neglect to define my sense of self. And through it all, I carried with me the lessons I had learned. That validation comes from within, that self-worth isn't dependent on anyone else, and that it's never too late to take control of your own life and define your own path. For the first time in my life, I was living fully, boldly, and unapologetically, and I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I had the strength, the resilience, and the clarity to face them. I was finally free. The months after my transformation were full of new opportunities and challenges that I couldn't have predicted. But with each step forward, I felt more grounded in the life I was building, more assured in my worth, and more determined to create something meaningful, not just for myself but for others as well. One morning, as I sat sipping my coffee and going through emails, a particular message caught my attention. It was an invitation to an international business competition that offered a substantial cash prize and an opportunity to pitch your entrepreneurial idea to a panel of well-known investors and industry leaders. I stared at the email, rereading it several times to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. The competition was prestigious, and the thought of standing in front of such influential people was both exhilarating and terrifying. This wasn't just any opportunity, it was a chance to take my educational platform concept and turn it into something far bigger, something that could make a real impact on how students accessed and interacted with learning materials. I hesitated. Even with all the progress I had made, there was a part of me that doubted. Was I really ready for something like this? Could my idea really compete with others who were likely far more experienced and established? But then, I thought back to everything I had gone through. My years of neglect, the endless struggle for validation, the painful moments when I had almost given up, the self-doubt, the fear, the uncertainty, they were all part of my story, but they no longer defined me. I had learned to trust myself, to embrace my abilities, and to go after what I wanted without fear of failure. I took a deep breath and clicked, accept. From that moment on, my life became a whirlwind of preparation. I dove headfirst into refining my pitch, working with mentors, and perfecting the technical aspects of my educational platform. I spent hours researching the latest trends in educational technology, connecting with experts, and learning everything I could to ensure that my idea wasn't just another project, but something that could change the way students approached learning. I was terrified, yes, but I was also invigorated. This was the challenge I had been waiting for, the one that would push me out of my comfort zone, that would test everything I had learned, and that would ultimately prove to me just how far I had come. The day of the competition arrived, and I found myself standing backstage, waiting for my turn to pitch. The room was filled with entrepreneurs, innovators, and industry professionals, people who had spent years in the field, honing their craft, and building successful businesses. The weight of the situation hit me all at once. But then, I remembered something my mentor had told me. You're not here by accident. You've earned this opportunity. Trust in your vision, and trust in yourself. The sound of my name echoed through the loudspeaker, and I walked onto the stage with a mixture of nerves and excitement. The spotlight hit me, and for a brief moment, I froze. It was one of those moments where time seems to stand still, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. But then, I took a deep breath and smiled, remembering that this was my moment. I wasn't here to impress anyone or win approval. I was here to share my passion, my vision, and my belief in what I was building. I began my pitch, my voice steady, as I explained the vision behind my educational platform, how it would provide personalized learning experiences for students with interactive tools, real-time feedback, and access to a wide range of resources. I highlighted how the platform would break down barriers to education, making it accessible to underserved communities and students who faced unique learning challenges. The investors listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering constructive feedback. As I spoke, I could feel a sense of calm confidence wash over me. I wasn't just talking to impress them, I was speaking about something that truly mattered to me, something that could make a real difference. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their validation. I was simply sharing my truth. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, one of the investors stood up and applauded, and soon, the whole room joined in. I stood there, overwhelmed with a mix of pride and disbelief. I had done it. I had taken the leap, stepped out of my comfort zone, and delivered my vision to some of the most influential people in the industry. The competition wasn't over yet, but I had already won. I had proven to myself that I was capable, that I didn't need anyone's approval, and that my ideas and abilities were just as valid as anyone else's. A few days later, I received a call from the competition organizers. They had selected my platform as one of the finalists. I was ecstatic not just because of the recognition, but because I had pushed myself beyond my limits, and it had paid off. I had taken the first step toward turning my dream into a reality. Over the next several weeks, I worked tirelessly to refine my platform, adding new features, improving the user interface, and preparing for the final round of the competition. I didn't let the pressure get to me. I had learned to trust in the process and in my own abilities. The final pitch was nerve-wracking, but when I stood before the panel of judges, I knew I was ready. I spoke with the same confidence and passion I had during my first pitch, and when I finished, the judges were impressed. But it wasn't the prize money or the recognition that mattered most to me. It was the realization that I had built something meaningful, that I had created something that could make a difference in the world. A week later, I received the news. I had won. It felt surreal at first. I had come so far from the girl who once sat in the shadows, desperately seeking validation from her family. I had built something that was entirely my own, something that had been born from my vision, my hard work, and my belief in myself. Winning the competition was a milestone, but it was only the beginning. The prize money allowed me to invest in my platform, to hire a small team to help bring my vision to life, and to expand the reach of my project. But more than that, it solidified something deep within me, that I was capable of achieving anything I set my mind to, not because anyone else believed in me, but because I believed in myself. The path ahead wasn't without its challenges. There were still moments of doubt, still days when I questioned whether I was truly on the right path, but I no longer felt the need to seek anyone else's approval. I had built a life that was mine, based on my own values, passions, and vision, and that was more than enough. One evening, as I sat at my desk reviewing the progress of my platform, I received a call from my dad. It had been a while since we had spoken, and I wasn't sure what to expect. "How's everything going?" he asked, his tone tentative. "It's going well," I replied. "I've been busy with the project. Things are really taking off." "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I've been following what you've been doing, and, well, I just want you to know that I see you. And I'm proud of what you've accomplished." His words were unexpected. It wasn't a grand gesture or a deep apology, but it was enough. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to seek validation from him. I simply acknowledged that he saw me, and that was all I needed. "I'm proud of me too," I said, smiling to myself. That conversation wasn't the closure I had once longed for, but it was a step toward understanding. It was proof that, while my parents might never fully change, I had already done the work I needed to do for myself. As I continued to build my platform, I also began to look toward the future with a sense of excitement and possibility. I wasn't tied to the past anymore. I wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations. I had created my own path, and it was one that was uniquely mine. And as I looked ahead, I knew one thing for certain. I had found my place in the world, not by being someone else, but by finally being true to myself. As the months rolled on after winning the competition, I began to realize something profound. Success wasn't just about achieving a specific goal, getting recognized, or reaching the top. It was about the journey, the lessons learned, the people met, the challenges faced, and the personal growth that came along with it. The momentum from the competition had given my educational platform the visibility and resources it needed to expand. But more than that, it had opened up opportunities I had never dreamed of. Investors who had previously brushed past me were now knocking at my door, eager to learn more about my vision. Educational institutions were starting to take notice, and I was invited to speak at conferences and workshops about how technology could revolutionize learning. But despite all the external success, something inside me shifted. I realized that while building my platform was important, the greater purpose was in the impact it could have. It was no longer just about creating something for myself or making a name for myself. It was about giving back, about empowering others, and about leading with purpose. One evening, after a long day of meetings and brainstorming sessions with my team, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come. A few years ago, I had been sitting in the shadows, desperate for validation, struggling to prove my worth. Now, I was sitting in a place of power not because of my position, but because of the person I had become. I had learned to lead with authenticity, to trust myself, and to surround myself with people who shared my values. But as I sat there, gazing out of the window at the city lights twinkling in the distance, I felt the familiar pull of doubt. Was I really ready for this level of responsibility? Could I maintain this success? Could I be the leader my team and my platform needed? I took a deep breath and smiled to myself. The person I was today, the one who had fought through years of neglect, who had learned to love herself and trust her own instincts, was ready. Not because I had all the answers, but because I had learned to embrace uncertainty, to step into discomfort, and to lead with purpose and compassion. It was time to take the next step. In the coming months, I began focusing not just on growing my platform, but on expanding my leadership role. I started mentoring younger entrepreneurs, giving talks at schools and universities, and collaborating with like-minded organizations that shared my vision for equitable access to education. One of the most fulfilling projects I took on was a partnership with a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing educational resources to underprivileged communities. Together, we worked to bring technology into classrooms where students had never had access to the tools that could help them thrive. It wasn't easy. There were logistical challenges, financial hurdles, and plenty of setbacks. But the work felt meaningful in a way I hadn't experienced before. It wasn't just about business. It was about giving people the tools to change their lives. Through that partnership, I learned something powerful. True leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room or having all the answers. It's about empowering others, giving them the resources and opportunities to succeed, and inspiring them to believe in themselves. It was a lesson I had to learn the hard way, but it was one that I was now eager to share with others. As I grew into my leadership role, I began to build a team of people who shared my values and vision. I surrounded myself with individuals who were passionate, creative, and willing to take risks. People who believed in the power of education and the potential of technology to change lives. Together, we built a culture of innovation, collaboration, and inclusivity. But as my team grew, so did the responsibilities. I had to learn how to delegate effectively, how to manage people with different strengths and weaknesses, and how to inspire them to take ownership of their work. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed, when the weight of leadership felt too much to bear. But in those moments, I reminded myself that leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about fostering an environment where everyone could thrive, where each person's contribution was valued. I took on the role of a mentor in ways I had never expected. I didn't just lead my team, I supported them, listened to them, and encouraged their personal and professional growth. I shared my experiences, my struggles, and the lessons I had learned along the way. And in return, they taught me just as much. One of the most rewarding aspects of leadership was watching my team grow, not just in their careers but in their own self-belief. I saw people who had once doubted their abilities step into roles of greater responsibility, take risks, and succeed. And I knew that I had played a part in that transformation, not by being a perfect leader, but by being a leader who understood the power of encouragement, compassion, and empowerment. As my platform grew, I realized that my mission had shifted. It was no longer just about creating a successful business. It was about building a community, a movement that could transform education on a global scale. I wanted to provide students not just with the tools to succeed academically, but with the confidence to believe in themselves, to dream big, and to pursue their passions without fear. I knew that the path ahead would be filled with challenges. There would always be setbacks, disappointments, and moments of doubt. But now, I understood that those challenges weren't obstacles. They were opportunities to learn, to grow, and to evolve. And with each challenge, I felt myself becoming a stronger, more confident leader. As I stood in front of a room full of educators at a conference, preparing to give my keynote address, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This was the moment I had been working toward, the moment when everything I had built, everything I had fought for, could make a real difference. I began my speech, my voice steady and clear. We are at a crossroads in education. We have the opportunity to reshape how students learn, to make education more accessible, more engaging, and more inclusive. But it starts with us educators, leaders, innovators, believing in the power of technology to bring about change. And he one of that made. The room was silent as I spoke, every person in the audience hanging on to my words. And as I looked out at them, I realized something profound. This was the culmination of everything I had gone through, everything I had learned. I was no longer the person who sought validation from others. I was the person standing before them, sharing my vision and inspiring them to take action. When the speech ended, the applause was deafening. But I didn't need the applause. I didn't need the recognition. What mattered was the impact I was making, the lives I was touching, and the legacy I was building. Later that evening, I received a message from my mom. She had watched my speech online, and for the first time, she expressed genuine pride, not because of the success I had achieved, but because of the person I had become. "I'm proud of you," she wrote. "Not because of the platform or the recognition, but because you've become someone who leads with integrity, compassion, and purpose. You're doing amazing things, and I see you." Her words were simple, but they meant the world to me. I had spent so many years seeking her validation, and now, I realized that I no longer needed it. I had become the person I had always wanted to be, not for her, not for anyone else, but for myself. The road ahead was still long, and I knew there would be challenges I hadn't anticipated. But I also knew that I was ready. I was a leader not because of the title I held, but because of the person I had become. I had learned to trust myself, to lead with compassion, and to inspire others to believe in their own potential. And as I continued on this journey, I knew one thing for sure. I was living the life I was meant to live, one where I was no longer waiting for anyone else's approval, but instead, creating a future that was uniquely mine. The journey I had been on was far from over. While my platform continued to grow and my leadership role became more defined, I began to realize that true success wasn't just about what I had built or how much I had achieved. It was about the legacy I would leave behind, the impact I could have on others, the change I could inspire, and the community I could foster. I had spent so many years chasing validation, seeking approval from my parents, from Lily, from society. But now, I was beginning to understand that success wasn't about accolades or recognition. It was about creating something meaningful that would stand the test of time, something that would make a real difference in the lives of others. As my platform expanded, so did the scope of my work. I had made partnerships with several educational institutions and nonprofits, each of which brought unique challenges and opportunities. But with every new project came the realization that leading this vision would require more than just technical expertise or business acumen. It would require something deeper, the ability to inspire, to build trust, and to guide others in a way that allowed them to grow and thrive. The first real test came when I was invited to speak at an international conference on education and technology. It was one of the most prestigious events in the field, and the thought of speaking before an audience of global leaders in education and technology made my stomach turn. But I knew this was an opportunity to share my vision with people who could truly help shape the future of education. It was also a chance to challenge myself and prove that I had grown enough to step into this role as a leader. The weeks leading up to the conference were filled with sleepless nights. I meticulously prepared my speech, refining my message until it felt authentic and aligned with my values. But as the event drew nearer, doubt crept in. Was my message powerful enough? Was I truly ready to stand before such a distinguished audience and speak with conviction? Could I really inspire change on such a large scale? The night before my presentation, I sat alone in my hotel room, staring out at the city lights below. My mind raced with thoughts of self-doubt, but I had learned that the only way to move through fear was to face it head-on. I had spent so long letting my insecurities hold me back, but now, I had a chance to prove to myself that I had what it took. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and reminded myself of everything I had accomplished, how far I had come from the girl who had once been invisible, who had sought validation from others to feel worthy. I had built something meaningful from nothing. I had created change. And now, it was time to share that change with the world. The next morning, I stood backstage, waiting for my turn. My heart pounded in my chest as I heard the previous speaker finish. It was almost my turn. And then, a funny thing happened. Instead of feeling terrified, I felt a quiet calm. For the first time, I wasn't focused on what people would think of me. I was focused on the message I wanted to share. I had a vision, and I was ready to speak about it. When I walked onto the stage, the crowd was a blur of faces, but I wasn't intimidated. I had spent so many years battling self-doubt, and now, I was standing before them, speaking from my heart. My voice was steady, and as I shared my story, the journey of building my platform, my vision for accessible and equitable education, the importance of empowering students, I felt a sense of fulfillment that was unlike anything I had ever known. The room was quiet as I spoke, and when I finished, the applause was thunderous. It wasn't just the praise I was seeking, it was the recognition that my message had resonated with people who truly cared about the future of education. And as I looked out at the sea of faces, I realized something crucial. This was the legacy I wanted to leave behind. Not a business, not a brand, but a movement that would help shape the world for generations to come. In the weeks that followed, I received messages from people around the world who had been inspired by my speech: educators, students, entrepreneurs, and leaders who wanted to join my mission to change the way education was delivered. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. My platform wasn't just a product, it was a catalyst for change. And with every new partnership, every new person who believed in my vision, I felt the weight of responsibility growing. I wasn't just leading a company, I was leading a movement. And with that responsibility came the realization that I had to lead with integrity, with humility, and with a deep sense of purpose. But leadership is never without its challenges. As my platform grew, so did the pressure. There were moments when the weight of it all felt suffocating, when the long hours, the countless meetings, the constant demands from investors and stakeholders became overwhelming. There were times when I questioned whether I was doing enough, whether I was leading in the right way. And there were moments when I felt like I was losing sight of the very thing that had driven me in the first place, the desire to make a meaningful impact. One evening, as I sat in my office, staring at the piles of work that seemed to multiply by the minute, I took a step back. I had been so focused on the business side of things that I had forgotten why I started this journey in the first place. I had started with a simple goal: to make education more accessible, to give students the tools they needed to succeed, and to empower them to believe in themselves. But somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of that vision, consumed by the pressures of running a growing enterprise. That night, I decided to take a step back to reset. I closed my laptop, picked up my phone, and called my mentor, someone who had been with me through every step of this journey. She had always been a sounding board, a source of wisdom and perspective. When I explained what I was feeling, she listened patiently, and then said something that changed my perspective. "Success is not about how big your platform gets or how many people you can reach," she said. "It's about how deeply you impact the lives of those you serve. Your mission hasn't changed, so don't lose sight of it. Focus on the people, not the numbers. Focus on the purpose, not the praise." Her words resonated with me. In the hustle of growth, I had forgotten the essence of what I was doing. I wasn't building a business for the sake of success. I was building it to change lives. It was time to refocus on the mission, to remember why I started this in the first place. I spent the next few weeks reconnecting with the communities I had been working with, spending time in schools, talking to students, and listening to their stories. It reminded me of the very heart of my mission: to empower students, to help them realize their potential, and to create a system of education that was accessible to all. And as I returned to the core of my mission, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The pressure didn't disappear, it was still there, still part of the journey, but I no longer allowed it to cloud my vision. I could balance the demands of business with the importance of the mission, knowing that success was not about how many people I reached, but how deeply I touched their lives. As the months passed, my platform continued to grow. I expanded into new regions, reaching students in underdeveloped areas, and worked with governments to implement our platform in public schools. But despite the external success, I knew that the real measure of success was not in the numbers. It was in the stories of students whose lives were being changed, whose futures were being shaped by the work we were doing. One evening, I received an email from a teacher in a rural area who had been using our platform for the past year. She wrote about a group of students who had struggled with reading and math, but after using our platform's interactive lessons, they had not only caught up, but exceeded expectations. The teacher shared a photo of the students with their certificates of achievement, grinning from ear to ear. Reading that email, I realized that this was the true meaning of success. This was why I had built my platform, not for recognition or accolades, but for moments like this. To see the impact we were making in the lives of real people, to see students who had once felt invisible discover their own potential. I realized that I was no longer trying to prove myself to anyone. I wasn't trying to win approval or recognition. I was simply living my truth, pursuing my mission, and trusting that by staying true to my purpose, the impact would follow. And in that moment, I understood something that had eluded me for so long. Success was not about the destination, it was about the journey. It was about the people you impacted along the way, the lives you changed, and the legacy you built. And the best part was that this journey was just beginning. As I look back on the path I've taken, it's hard to believe how much has changed. It feels like a lifetime ago that I was standing in the shadow of my sister, desperate for validation, trying to prove my worth to parents who never seemed to see me. I spent so many years chasing a recognition that was never truly mine to claim. But now, as I stand here, looking at what I've built, I realize that it was never about their approval. It was about believing in myself and trusting that I had something valuable to offer the world. The journey has been long, full of setbacks, doubts, and moments of despair, but it has also been full of triumphs, growth, and self-discovery. I've learned that success isn't measured by how others see you or by how far you've come in comparison to others. It's measured by the impact you have on those around you, the legacy you leave, and the way you inspire others to reach for their dreams. As I stand in the conference room, looking out over the team that has grown with me, I am filled with a deep sense of pride. It's not just about the educational platform we've built, it's about the community we've created. A community of learners, educators, and innovators who believe in the power of education to change lives. A community that continues to grow, expand, and evolve, just as I have. We've built something special, and while there's still much work to be done, I feel an overwhelming sense of peace knowing that the foundation is strong. We're not just changing the way education is delivered, we're changing the way people think about their potential, about what they can achieve when given the right tools and support. I think back to the early days when I was alone, trying to figure out how to build something that could make a real difference. There were so many moments when I doubted myself, when I felt like giving up, but I kept pushing forward, believing that if I could just make it through the next obstacle, I could find a way to create something that mattered. And now, as I look at the platform that's grown beyond what I ever imagined, I know that every struggle, every failure, and every lesson has led me to this point. It hasn't been easy. There have been days when I've been overwhelmed by the pressure, when I've felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. There have been times when I've questioned if I was doing enough, or if I was on the right path. But through it all, I've learned the importance of resilience, of staying true to my vision, and of never losing sight of why I started this journey in the first place. I think about the students who have used our platform, the ones who were once told they weren't smart enough, the ones who struggled to keep up, the ones who felt invisible. To see them now, thriving, believing in their own abilities, and achieving things they never thought possible, this is the true measure of success. It's not in the number of users, the amount of funding we've raised, or the awards we've won. It's in the lives we've changed. But my journey is not just about the platform, it's about the people I've met along the way. It's about the mentors who have guided me, the colleagues who have become friends, and the team that has supported me every step of the way. It's about the relationships I've built with people who share my passion for education and innovation. We've come together to create something greater than any one individual could have accomplished. We've created a movement, one that will continue to grow and inspire change long after I've moved on to other ventures. I've learned the importance of leadership not just in terms of business, but in terms of people. Leadership is about more than just making decisions. It's about listening, empowering others, and creating a culture where everyone feels valued. I've made mistakes along the way, times when I've failed to communicate effectively or missed opportunities to support my team. But I've learned from each of those moments and used them to become a better leader. Looking back, I realize that this journey has been about so much more than business. It's been about finding my voice, about embracing my worth, and about learning to trust in my own abilities. It's about understanding that I don't need anyone's approval to feel successful. I don't need anyone to tell me I'm enough. I know that now, deep in my soul. As my platform continues to grow, I know there will be new challenges to face. There will be moments of doubt, times when I feel like I'm on the edge of burnout, and situations that force me to question everything I've worked for. But I also know that I am stronger now. I am more resilient. I have the tools I need to navigate whatever comes my way, and I trust myself to make the right decisions. And as I think about the future, I am filled with excitement and possibility. There is so much more to be done, so many more people to help, so many lives to change. I am not done yet. I am just getting started. The true legacy I want to leave is one of empowerment. I want to be remembered not just for building a platform or creating a successful business, but for the way I inspired others to believe in themselves. I want to be remembered for the students whose lives were transformed by the tools we created, for the entrepreneurs I mentored who went on to build their own successful businesses, for the educators whose classrooms were enriched by the technology we provided. I want to be remembered for creating a space where people could come together and support one another, where the focus was always on the collective good, not on individual success. As I stand at the helm of this movement, I know that my story is just one of many. There are so many others out there who are still fighting for their voices to be heard, for their worth to be recognized. And while I may never be able to reach everyone, I know that I have the power to continue making an impact, to continue leading with purpose and compassion. In the end, the true measure of success isn't in what you build, it's in the lives you touch, the difference you make, and the legacy you leave behind. As I look ahead, I know that my work isn't finished, but for the first time in my life, I am content. I am content because I have done the work of finding myself, of discovering my worth, and of building something that reflects my true purpose. I've realized that success isn't about a destination, it's about the journey. It's about living authentically, embracing every moment, and trusting in the process. It's about knowing that you are enough, exactly as you are, and that everything you've done and everything you will do is part of the story you are writing for yourself. And now, as I step into the future, I know that my journey is only beginning. The legacy I will leave is one of courage,